Anyway, today is a great since Russia's going. This is a war that Putin thought would last about 3 days. Because remember, on the third day of the conflict, the Russian government issued a communique to the media saying, that's it, we've done it, hail our success. Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia are now going to be fully reunited. And that one was quickly retracted. It just seems so risible these days, just so badly wrong. Putin called it a special military operation, and I suppose that's what he believed it was going to be more than a war. It was going to be a walkover. If they weren't be welcomed with open arms, they'd be welcomed with raised hands. Um, the Ukrainians would just capitulate. Well, they certainly haven't thrown in the towel. That the situation is actually is grave for the Ukrainians. As I previously predicted, the Russians were eventually going to sort out their logistics, and their weight of metal was going to tell. That's why they're absolutely hammering the city of Severodonetsk in eastern Ukraine. And the warmer weather was going to favor the Russians when they're able to go off the road in their trucks and so on without them sinking into the mud because it's fully dried out now. Anyway, so it looks like it's becoming a war of attrition. Can the Russians just grind the Ukrainians down because they outnumber them 3-1? Well, and the Ukrainian economy is going to lose about 50% this year. The Russian economy has already lost 10%, is easily going to lose 20% this year. But the idea is that Russia, with just greater resources, can withstand it for longer. Moreover, Putin thinking that Western unity is going to crack and the West has no resolve, they've got no stomach for the fight. Not the Western countries are actually sending soldiers to fight, but even with their deep pockets, are just not willing to fund the Ukrainians and to suffer the economic blowback of sanctions. Because sanctions, if you hurt this other country, you also hurt yourself, though the effect may be asymmetric, and that people in European Union countries will soon sicken of high oil and gas prices. Um, and that's already paying some dividends for Putin. He thinks that people in the European Union, the United States, they're yellow bellies, and he's not entirely wrong, I'm afraid to say. But anyway, so this conflict's going to go on for at least several months. I mean, some Ukrainians said they're going to win in August. I think that is ludicrously optimistic. I would be elated to be proved totally wrong. I would just be over the moon if I was completely humiliated and Ukraine won a resounding victory in August. I just don't think it's likely. Anyway, the Russia's new plan of just concentrating on one axis of advance, mainly the east, seems to be working for them, though very slowly, because they've had Severodonetsk surrounded on three sides. They've been pulverized in that city for 3 weeks, and they still haven't quite taken it. They've entered the eastern suburbs of the city. They claim to have taken now 80% of it, and that's probably not much of an exaggeration. So the Ukrainians withdrawing east of the river, sorry, west of the river, I should say. Hello, Roger Achaya. Thank you, peace and love from India. Well, Jai Hind, Ab Kaisa Hai. I can't actually speak Hindi. I'm going to shock you. I'm actually not Indian. Um, anyway, so it's ongoing, and part of the problem has been the tardiness with which Western countries have provided weaponry to the Ukrainians, not wanting to be overly provocative. They don't want this to be the Third World War. Well, whilst they tarry, the Russians advance. If all this military hardware were provided before the war, maybe it never would have happened. Peace through strength, and then Dmitry Peskov, who's Putin's press secretary, saying this is pouring fuel on the fire. Well, there's a false equivalency here. Helping a democracy which is being aggressed illegally defend itself is not remotely comparable to the arms of the aggressor state, which has carried out several large-scale atrocities as documented by the United Nations, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and so forth. International Criminal Court investigators are there. There was no legal or moral basis for this invasion of Ukraine. The International Court of Justice ruled that it was a completely specious accusation of genocide. Moscow leveled at Kiev, and indeed under the Genocide Convention, false accusations of genocide are a crime. And that is being the boy who cried wolf, and people will give less credit to real genocide if you make these false allegations. There's still a few thousand civilians left in Severodonetsk. I mean, it's a pity the Ukrainians didn't withdraw them earlier. They're going to get these HIMARS, these special rocket systems, but the United States and the UK are only going to provide ones which can hit 80 kilometers away. Zelensky's vowed not to use them to hit targets inside the Russian Federation. I mean, I don't see why he should be restricted to that. Say it would upset Russia too much. Well, good, they deserve it. They started the war. They've hit targets in Ukraine. No reason why Ukraine shouldn't hit targets deep inside Russia. And indeed, they launched some cross-border raids, not very large scale, blowing up fuel depots, maybe derailing trains and stuff like that. Obviously, the United States is legally able to provide any and all weaponry to Ukraine, except weapons of mass destruction, because they've signed non-proliferation treaties about that. And again, I'm astonished that Russia hasn't actually used weapons of mass destruction itself, chemical gas attacks, although there might have been one small one, I'm not sure actually killed anybody, biological weapons attacks or nuclear weapons attacks, and they were already preparing the script for it. They're preparing the ground in terms of what the public mind, making these utterly specious accusations that the Ukrainians, in conjunction with the Americans, have been developing weapons of mass destruction on Ukrainian soil. And so then, if Russia carried out one of these war crimes, they would, of course, blame the victims. This is straight from their playbook. They've deployed this despicable stratagem in Syria on multiple occasions since 2015. Anyway, Ukraine actually is moving forward around Kherson. We're not hearing about that very much. That's the largest Ukrainian city that the Russians have captured. Is actually a port. I mean, it seems a bit inland, but from the river flowing out onto the Black Sea. So if they could cut them off, because that's west of the river Dnieper, then the Russians would be able to receive reinforcements, more supplies, would be able to retreat. They might force several thousand of them to surrender. And I'm amazed the Ukrainians have not blown up that bridge across the Kerch Strait linking Crimea to Russia. So Russia's taken an extra 10% of Ukrainian landmass. They already had about 10% before this war began the 24th of February. Of course, this war, in a sense, is going back 8 years when Russia seized some of Luhansk and Donetsk districts as well as the Crimean Peninsula. So 80% of Ukrainian soil remains in Ukrainian hands. So at this rate, if you can take 10% of Ukraine in 100 days, to take the remaining 80% would take you 800 days. So that's over 2 years. But I know this is a very rough way of calculating it. Now, the Russians are hoping that eventually Ukraine will just be exhausted and that they will sign a peace deal, sign over sovereignty of some of their land. They will be neutralized, reduced to a satrapy of Russia, really never have any military alliance, never join the European Union, and can be effectively an adjunct to Russia, even if it's unofficially. So Putin would like to appoint a yes man there, someone even more compliant than Lukashenko. Remember, till 2 years ago, Alexander Lukashenko and Putin, they regularly sparred. They had the same enemies, but they disagreed, and Lukashenko wasn't willing to have his country simply absorbed into the Russian Federation, even though he'd signed a treaty promising to do just that in 1999. But I think that will be one of the outcomes of the war, that Belarus is now so economically enmeshed with Russia that they just have no alternative. Either officially or unofficially, it's going to become part of Russia. Anyway, so Russia seems to have almost seized the whole of Luhansk district, which obviously is good news for them, but they're a very long way from a regime change. They haven't decapitated the state. They're very far from Kiev. Another thing is the Belarusians are helping the Russians a lot, supposedly not fighting, although the Ukrainians did accuse the Belarusians of sending 10 troops in the very Belarusian airfields about a week ago. Now, where could they have gone? I suppose because so many Russian military helicopters were shot down, the Ruski said, "You got to give us your choppers," which they've done, I would guess. Anyway, so it's really about the will to fight, or as they say, it's not the size of the dog in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the dog. But obviously, the technology counts for a lot as well. And Western countries just need to provide that more of it and faster to make this very painful and very costly for Russia, to reduce morale. Putin realizes unachievable. He's realized some of his goals already, pulling back from Kiev when that was a defeat for them, pulling back from Kharkiv, the second biggest city. So, this could be done. If you think this is think it's an existential threat to his regime, that he has a better chance of saving his regime by ending the war than by continuing it, at that point he would pull back. But the cost, in terms of lives, in terms of money, has got to be very high indeed. And if it's just too agonizing, then he would change course. Think of the consequences if he'd succeeded already. The repercussions, that'd be horrific. He would then have attacked Moldova. He could have taken the whole of Georgia. He could threaten other countries. He could start testing NATO's resolve by crossing the border into NATO states, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, former Soviet countries, even Finland, once part of the Russian Empire. There's some Russian ultranationalists who said we should take back Alaska. So it will be very, very worrying indeed. It would hugely embolden other cruel tyrannies and aggressors around the world. So I take my hat off to the Ukrainians. I hold my manhood cheap. I'm very glad I'm not in the fight myself. And it's all a pity because this is not angels versus devils. They're good people and bad people of every nationality. They're bad people who do good things, and they're good people who do bad things. And it was all completely avoidable. It's really because of Putin and his camarilla. This has happened totally unnecessarily, and Ukraine has the absolute unfettered right to join any military alliance anytime it wants, and you can see why they would want to and they would need to, because they were under a grave threat from Russia, which wanted to wipe them out as a nation. And they have the right to join the European Union if the EU wants to let them in. And then the EU should at the very least give them candidate status. That'd be something for them, some reward, because they are in effect defending the European Union. So it's an awful pity. So, I mean, I hope Putin and his coterie get the fate they so richly deserve. Toodaloo.